I know, but see, I think
Fauci.
they named the swine flu after Fauci, if you really want to know.
All right, so
Um,
you saw the footage of Fauci at Georgetown, right?
no,
You've
I
seen it.
know, I
All right.
know, I
So
know,
Fauci
I know.
predicts a surprise pandemic. Everybody thinks he's talking about
But that was
SARS-CoV-2.
2017. That was 2017. I think he
Yes,
predicted that.
yes,
Well,
yes.
I would argue that that tells me he knows they're going to release something.
Correct. I agree with you
Okay,
100%.
okay. I'm just
I
trying to
think, all
make
right, so
sure where
here's,
we're at.
all right, so I think the plan was already set. So understand that when Fauci makes the prediction, it's 1 week before the inauguration of Trump. He's won the election. They didn't think that was going to happen. Hillary was supposed to win.
No,
So as
I
soon as
know.
he wins, this is a week before, and Fauci's predicting a surprise outbreak for this incoming administration, which is kind of odd. And yet the outbreak, so now we're going to track down this outbreak because to me it appears that the real pandemic is the blue pandemic. This is the virus that Fauci predicted. When Fauci said we're going to have a surprise outbreak, he just can't keep his mouth shut. He just can't keep his mouth shut.
And it was 2019 that Gates said that 2020 would be the year of vaccines.
Right. So what happened in
Another weird
2019?
moment.
So I'm going to show you what
Right.
happened in 2019 that
Okay.
shows us that this was the problem. So what you're seeing here on the blue chart, this is annual P&I deaths. Look at the numbers. This
Right.
does not foot with what you've been told.
At
The
all.
CDC is telling you 22,000, 30,000, 40,000, 50,000, but the real numbers are like 180,000, 175,000, 200, 190,000. If you
And
knew
you're
that's
getting
how,
this off this flu view. You're getting
I'm
this off
getting
the flu
straight
view.
from FluView, straight from FluView. This is
Okay.
P&I deaths. So the thing here is, so wait a second. If these are P&I deaths, what the hell is this thing you keep calling 22,000? What is that? Well, that's something they call influenza burden. And we're going to take a look at how do they calculate influenza burden, because in the database business, we call that a derived value. It doesn't exist naturally. It's a calculated value, and we're going to look at what is influenza burden. Why did we need something called influenza burden? Is it because the P&I numbers were too high? And if America heard that 200,000 people still died of influenza, even though they had the inoculations, we'd never take them. So we need a much more palatable number like 12,000, 18,000, 22,000. Those are much more palatable. Numbers like 185,000 people died this season of influenza, even though we distributed the vaccine to 40 million people.
But couldn't they just say it would be 1 million if we didn't, and therefore?
I'm sure they would. But that's that.
This was easier.
Right. And again, this is just like footnote stuff. In other words, so wait a second. These numbers, when Dr. Fauci said 80,000 people died in the 2017-2018 season, here it says 200,000. What the hell is he talking about? And then, if that's all the case, what are these big things on the right? These are huge numbers. This got no attention. Let's continue to the next slide. The next slide, you're going to see the Blue Mountain chart, and you're going to see a tally for each one of the years up in the header. So up in the header, you can see by season 275,000, 400 something thousand people, 300. These are huge numbers. This adds up to 1.2 million people since October 2019. That's a lot of people that died from P&I. Now, if you jump ahead to the next slide, this is where Dr. Fauci tells PBS 80,000 people died in 2017, 2018. He's on camera. His slide says it. He says it. He says it verbally. He says about 80,000 people died in this terrible season. Really bad news. Jump ahead to the next slide. That's what FluView says. The number of people who died with influenza is like 15,000. The number of people who died with pneumonia was like 180,000. How does he come up with 80?
Good question.
Yeah. Well, look at the next slide, because the CDC tells you in 2019, 2020, the burden of flu. You see the slide with the Madison Square Garden in Florida?
Got it.
See in the middle, it says the burden of flu, 2019.
So I'm going to guess that's where flu was a contributor in a death. Is that right?
Well, no. What they're saying is they're into hospitalizations, and people who died at home don't get counted. And so for hospitalists, the public doesn't care about hospitalists. We don't care about how many nights you're in bedpan usage and utilization. Nobody cares about that. We want to know how many people died of the flu.
Right.
So when they're telling you 22,000 is the burden of flu, what is that? Let's go to the next slide. The next slide is from the paper that defines influenza burden. Take a look.
So is that equation? Is that equation?
Yeah. Don't you love that?
Reported deaths divided by reported hospitalizations, deaths per hospitalization, times 1/% of deaths that occur in the hospital.
Isn't that cute? This is what I call professional obfuscation. This is
Jesus.
This is when you pay. This is when you pay 8 or 10 people to come up with a new factor so that nobody can figure out what the hell you're doing.
We call that a fudge factor where I come from.
Look at the pyramids. How do you have a formula that requires geometry to follow the logic here? You see the pyramids in the middle here? They've got a whole logic tree here. I challenge anybody from the CDC to take the data that we just pulled from FluView and show us how they calculated the 22,000.
But you can take that equation and turn it absurd without looking at the pyramid. And that is, if you take reported deaths over percent of deaths that occur in hospitalization, you essentially end up with a ratio that tells you deaths outside the hospital and inside.
Yeah.
Right. And then divide that by hospitalizations. That leads to nonsense, I think. I think that leads to complete nonsense.
So I do a series on my YouTube channel where I read documents like this I call bedtime stories, because they're ridiculous and they're boring.
You have a twisted personality.
So I read the whole thing. So we read it. It's absurd. It's so absurd. It's professional obfuscation. They put this together so that, go back up a slide with me. Go back to the slide from the CDC. Now they've got plausible deniability. Now they can tell you the number's 22,000. Here's how. Oh, yeah. No. That's not from FluView, Dave. That's not the actual number of people that died from FluView, Dave.
That's the massage data, right?
That's burden. It says right there, Dave. It says the burden of flu. Were you not paying attention, Dave? You're accusing us of doing something. It says the burden of flu. Are you not familiar with influenza burden? This is their plausible deniability. This is the
the funny thing is, a person who knows just English would just figure that's an adjective. It's an adjective.
Dave, nobody's figured this out. This has been going on for 10 or 12 years already. Nobody, look at this. Go back to the definition with the triangles and the form. This is absurd. This is absurd. Great. I'll send you the full document so you can read it when you're on the toilet. You're going to enjoy this one.
I don't know.
I jump ahead one more page. So that's how they come together. You go to, you can see the triangles. In other words, we're interested in the top of the triangle, the top of the pyramid. It says died. If you jump ahead to slide 21, the PLOS1 slide, you'll see that I blew up the triangle diagram. And
okay, reported rate,
Here you go.
adjusted rate, hospitalization.
Extrapolate to U.S. population. Correct for under
Died,
detection.
hospitalized. Holy Jesus.
All I want, Dave, is the number in the top of the triangle which says died. That's the only one I want.
Right.
Just tell me how many died. I don't need all the others.
Right.
A little complicated, huh?
Yeah.
No. All right, so let's jump ahead. Let's see if we can figure this out. All
Looks
right,
good for a boardroom presentation.
It's a lot of fun. All right, so we've got our 10-year baseline with this apparent P&I outbreak. Jump ahead. We've got a COVID outbreak that comes on strong out of nowhere that seems to track with that thing. Now, the next slide is a white paper that I put together tongue-in-cheek in October of 2020. This was Queen's Gambit. Don't know if you play chess.
Okay. Honorary PhD.
Yes, thank you. So, well, I'm ready to sit. I'm ready to defend my thesis. Anybody who wants to sit through all my my Las Vegas stuff, I'm ready to defend that for a PhD in criminology any day.
I'll be your honorary advisor for this.
There we go. All right. So here we go. We've got decreased influenza activity during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, it turns out there was a paper from a group that documented the phenomenon in Australia, Chile, South Africa, and the United States. And I looked at their paper and I went to the system at the WHO and I said, okay, so you documented this in 4 countries. That's fabulous. And then what happened? Did you guys have a lunch date? Did you have a party at Bennigan's? Was there a TGI Friday special? Because the same phenomenon appears to have happened in 100 other countries. And you missed that part? So that's why I wrote the paper. I cited their work. They documented the first 4 countries. I documented the remaining 102. Okay. So what is the phenomenon we're looking at here? Jump ahead with me to the next page, if you would, and you'll see about 6 different countries. This is a system from the WHO. It's called GISRS FluNet. And unlike the system at the CDC, we were looking at flu deaths, influenza and pneumonia deaths, P&I deaths. This is specimens. The WHO tracks specimens of influenza that are being tested all over the world so that we can see if there's an outbreak in Nigeria, if there's an outbreak in Cambodia, we see it, right? You can see what's happening. So I go to the system because I'm a cartographer. I'm a map guy. So I want to see, show me all the other countries. I want to, don't tell me about Australia, Chile, and New Zealand. I would keep going, right? Let's spin the globe, baby. How did influenza disappear in all these countries at the same exact time?
2 friends having coffee together when something flies by their window. It might be out on that lawn, which is wide, at least half of a playing field. Because there's no explaining what your imagination can make you see and feel. Your body needs nothing, you'll be hypnotized. It's not a meaningless question to ask if they've been and gone. I remember a talk about North Carolina in a strange, strange poem. You see, the sides were like glass in the thick of a forest without a road. And if any man's hand ever made that land, then I think it would have showed. And that's why it seems like a dream. They got me hypnotized.
What the hell was that? How did that happen? I go to the next page. It turns out that in weeks 11 through 14, influenza disappears All right. So mid 11 is mid March.
Right.
So when Trump says national emergency, influenza
Boom.
disappears from Earth. So in 28 days, in a 4-week window, over 100 countries eradicate influenza for over a year. It's gone. Now, again, the paper is based on this other paper. You can flip, go to page 27, 28, you'll see their paper. So they documented it in South Africa and Chile. And what about Hungary? What about Germany? So jump with me now. I want to show the audience a whole bunch of countries. The first one I'm going to show you is Switzerland. Jump ahead till you see Switzerland.
I see a purplish chart of blue.
Next one.
There we go. Green and orange.
Switzerland,
Green and
right?
brown.
Okay, upper left-hand corner says Switzerland.
Yes.
Okay. World Health Organization, influenza laboratory surveillance from the Global Influenza Surveillance and Response System, GISRS. This is the WHO. So I'm at the World Health Organization's influenza surveillance monitoring system. And according to them, Switzerland eradicated influenza in weeks 11 and 12. It was gone. Wow.
Let me ask, are all these weeks zero?
Yes.
The ones on this chart, this thing wasn't published in May or anything like that.
No,
this is the entire year.
This is retrospective.
That's the entire year.
Oh,
that's impressive.
If you're smiling now, you're gonna.
That's funny.
All right, next country. Jump ahead with me.
Yeah, I got the pattern.
Ukraine.
There's someone got the flu. Someone got the flu.
Ukraine.
48.
Look at
holy.
United Arab Emirates, Turkey, United Kingdom, United States.
UK didn't play along completely.
Okay, yeah. Now go to the United States, and then you'll see a
There, I see it.
All right, then I've got a multi-year chart of the United States, so that you get a little bit of a baseline understanding of.
Oh yeah, I've seen something like this.
Okay.
So.
Go to the next one. 4 on a screen. 4 on a screen. Next one. 4 to a square. You see a pattern? Do you need to be a virologist? Do you need to be an epidemiologist to notice something here and say, hey, wait a second. Influenza just disappeared at the same time?
Simultaneously. Yeah.
What's the next page? We got Denmark. It's like almost 2 years. It's gone. Next one's Norway. Look how steep it falls off, too. So the fall off is dramatic. I got Sweden, right? Keep going. Sweden, UK. UK is real odd. UK seems like they turn it on, turn it off, turn it on, turn it off. I don't know what the hell they're doing over there.
I'm in Sweden, UK. There's UK.
There you
okay.
go. There you go. And then you'll
look at that. That's a step function right there. That's unbelievable.
Yeah. And then I've got a page where you see over 100 countries. So
to prove you have them. Yes.
Yes. And what you'll also notice, if you jump ahead to the next slide, this is pediatric influenza. So pediatric influenza in the United States appears to have disappeared as well. So
why would it all of a sudden appear briefly? What is that? One spike? What the hell is
just
that?
One.
That's one case.
That's
one case.
Yes.
One death.
One death. One pediatric death. So we had 100 and something, 100 and something, 100 and something, and one.
Weren't kids back in school by then?
Not in 2020. They were out. And I've got 2 pediatrics. Yeah, I got 2 pediatrics to look at here. And then we get back to the 2 pandemics, the green one and the blue one. And so the question is, well, how do you hide a blue pandemic? Well, there's 2 things you need. All right. So if you came to me as a magician and said, it appears that one of these viruses that we've been working on at Walter Reed may have gotten out from one of our labs somewhere, and we don't really want it traced back to Walter Reed. How do we hide that? What kind of plan could we come up with so that this pandemic we're about to experience, everybody's not going, well, that's Walter Reed's thing. That came from Jeffrey Taubenberger. How do we do that? How do we hide a pandemic? I'm going to show you how to
Release
do
another.
it. Exactly. Well, that's step one. So step one is I need a scapegoat virus that presents similarly. It
Right.
presents similarly. It's a respiratory infection. It's going to.
So when you say it came out of Walter Reed, so Walter Reed is also a Fort Detrick wannabe.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Same thing. Fort Detrick and Walter
Okay.
Reed, they're synonymous. So,
Okay.
meaning U.S. AMRID, United States military.
Got it.
Yeah. So, which strain it is specifically? How do I know? These guys are whipping up strains every week. So, but the net of it is, why would you hide an influenza pandemic? Why would you do that?
The pooch.
Right. All right. So, first thing I would do is I said, well, I need a scapegoat virus. Who's got Peter Daszak's
By the way, I have a number of contacts who said they got sicker than shit in 19, and that they think they got COVID in 19. That story pops up a lot. Well, now I'll tell you another part of that story that's really interesting. A friend of mine who reached out to me, who was I couldn't tell if he was just a whack job or not. I've gotten to know him. I spent time with him on my deck. Turns out he's Canadian military intel, and he said that the entire world military games in Wuhan in October of 2019, they all got sicker than shit, and there were no Chinese in sight. There was something so suspiciously wrong with the story. So October is at least is the latest that it started, wherever the hell it
So started. I believe that the Wuhan games was the super spreader event for both viruses.
What a brilliant way
for both.
Well, but if the Fort Detrick / Walter Reed one was a pooch screw, if they screwed the pooch, would they fly some over to Wuhan or something?
We just looked at all that stuff from the WHO, and what we know is that in the summer of 2019, so June, July, August of 2019, Australia goes through the worst influenza season they've seen in 100 years. 4 times more people die from influenza in Queensland than had the prior year.
Flu experts are calling it the strangest season of all.
We haven't had something like this in living memory. To kick off so early is most unusual.
The problem with the word influenza is its misappropriated meaning. We get a cough or cold and then wrongly moan, we've got the flu. It's a mistake, which means we don't take the real flu seriously enough, even though last year it killed 1,100 Australians and put another 30,000 in hospital. It's a deadly danger, but there is some good news. Scientists are currently working on a super vaccine to beat the virus, one that's much more effective and longer lasting than the current yearly flu jab. In the meantime, though, as Karl Stefanovic reports, Australians need to avoid the flu like the plague.
Influenza has the potential to be very dangerous, I think, compared to some issues such as Ebola or a new strain of flu such as swine flu. People have become desensitised because it's there every year. But it is certainly a serious infection.
Notifications for influenza have skyrocketed this year, hitting almost 58,000 cases so far. That dwarfs the number of notifications normally received by this time of year. Already, 139 people have died, including a 3-year-old in Victoria and a 15-year-old girl in Adelaide.
It has been a very bad year, although technically we're still not in the flu season.
The pre-season's been dreadful, with early flu cases running up to 6 times higher than normal. We'll hit 40,000 victims later this week, almost as many as the whole of last year. There are outbreaks in aged care homes, with influenza deaths now occurring each week.
None of this bodes particularly well. We have seen a busy early season.
And an early start
may mean we see a slightly earlier peak. week.
Arriving now, 6 million flu jabs, more than ever, being distributed at record speed. Demand for the high-strength shot for over 65s is at an all-time high, and it's free. Children under 5 can also get a free shot.
The testing of the viruses that we've seen in people so far, they match with the vaccine we're using. So we should get good protection.
While they're already in the high-risk category, there's added incentive this year for obese people to avoid the flu. New research has found because they carry more virus, not only are they more likely to catch it, they're also more likely to spread it. Alex Hart, 7 News.
4
They
times
also
more.
suffered-
400.
They also suffered the first wave of Nazi-like behavior in the
So here-
history
so-
of Australia.
So here's what happens. It appears that the influenza outbreak begins in the Southern Hemisphere in 2019. Australia sends 100 athletes to Wuhan. Chile goes to Wuhan. South Africa. So, in other words, the countries
Everybody goes to Wuhan.
they all
Everybody-
go to Wuhan. 10,000 athletes. 10,000 athletes. 100,000 spectators. 2 pathogens. Peter
I think they released them
Daszak.
both.
Peter Daszak. Well, the influenza one was already out. It was already in the wild, and it does its own thing. You send 100 sweaty athletes
let me
to
just get
Wuhan.
this straight.
Everybody's going to get it.
You think they knew it was out, and therefore they shipped a shitload to Wuhan to
I
release it
think-
simultaneously with COVID?
Vice versa, but yes. So you just put the cart in front of the horse. The influenza pandemic was already underway in August in Australia. Fauci knows Australia is going to the Wuhan Games. They're going to bring it there. Nobody
I
has to do
see.
anything. Nobody has to lift a finger.
I see.
It's coming to Wuhan.
So he had to just release the COVID.
That's it. So he calls Daszak. Daszak's office is on 34th Street, New York City. They're like,
By the way, Daszak has blocked me on Twitter. I've never
Me
once said a
too.
word to the guy. He knows who's
Yeah.
trash talking him.
Yeah, same with me. So he blocked me too. So you call Daszak and you say, Peter, I need you to meet me in Central Park. This is not an email conversation.
Right. Yeah.
I need a respiratory virus that presents this way. That's it. What do you
Right.
got? Now, I'm going to suggest something to you that's something I've been developing. I've been having some conversations privately with Dr. Tal Braun, and he's a counterterrorism expert. And we're talking about how if you were going to manufacture, or if you were going to choose a scapegoat virus, a patsy virus, a virus that you wanted all the attention to be on, having a furin cleavage site
Oh yeah,
is good. In other words, I'm hoping somebody's going to find it and go, hey, wait a second. This has got a CGG.
This
Who the hell?
came right out of the Wuhan lab. Yeah.
Guess what? Guess what? I mean, I don't know if you do any fishing, but this is what I said to Dr. Braun.
I know fishing well.
All right. There's 2 different kinds of lures when you go fishing. There's the lures that actually look like a fish. It looks like a little baby fish. And then there's lures
the
that
super normal stimulus, right? The
Right. And
flashy, yeah.
then there's the ones that have got the 3D holographic green and orange stuff that are designed to aggravate and attract
Right.
attention, not look like another fish.
Right.
If you needed a scapegoat virus,
You need the second lure.
want the one that's got the kitchen sink in it.
Right.
It's got GP120. It's got
Right.
CGG. What doesn't this thing have in it? So in other words, I've got Dr. Braun says, wait a second, this is the same sequence as we find it. This is the GP120 sequence. This is the same thing as snake venom. This is in the HIV strain. And then I got and then Dr. Quay.
The snake venom story never got legs. It was interesting. It showed up and then it got pounded.
You know why? Because the sequence is not easy to remember. It's not like CGG. Everybody can remember CGG. CGG is fear and cleavage site. So you've got a whole bunch of lay people that don't know anything about, how to build a virus, but they know CGG is the fear and cleavage site. Everybody knows that now, right? Lay people know that. But the snake venom sequence in the GP120 doesn't roll off the tongue like that. So I think that's why it didn't get any traction.
I'm in a doctor Zoom group who didn't buy the snake venom story. I'm in a doc Zoom group with virologists and stuff. They didn't like it either.
All right. My point is, if there are chains, if there are little chains, little sequences, CGG, the GP120 sequence, all these little sequences, it's like, dude, what is this? They put the kitchen sink in here?
You needed one to be identifiably lab-derived, basically.
Yeah. I want So if I'm Fauci right now, and I've got a blue and a green outbreak, I got a blue virus and I want the attention on Wuhan.
Right.
Now I'm going to pretend like that's a conspiracy theory. You guys are out of your minds. This came from a wet market, and screw you all. You don't know what you're talking about. And
keep us squealing
for 3 years, and then just when everybody gets bored of that, you drop a raccoon dog into the story. Raccoon dog,
which looks like. The raccoon dog looks like a border collie and a raccoon.
Where the hell did they pull this out of left field 3 years in? They say, maybe the raccoon dog was in there with the pangolin in the bed.
That was like 3 months ago, right? That was
recent.
That came out of left field.
Correct.
That came out of left field. It's like, what are you?
When I interviewed you for it, you were talking about how little progress we've made in science in combating pandemics, because in 1918, the advice was wear a mask, wash your hands.
That's right.
And 103 years later, wear a mask, wash your hands.
It was soul crushing to find that. I was really hoping that, like in 1918, they'd be like, drink a tincture of mercury and butterfly juice. I was hoping it'd be like some bizarre thing, and I'm like, we've come a long way, baby. It's the exact same.
How do you feel about the science now, though?
So I will say this. I honestly mean this. I think we owe a great debt of gratitude to science. Science has, in many ways, helped ease the suffering of this pandemic, which was more than likely caused by science. And that's kind of...
Hold on one second.
No. Now, listen.
It's coffee. I wouldn't do that to you. I wouldn't do that to you. What do you mean by that? Do you mean like there was a chance that this was created in a lab? There's an investigation.
A chance?
Well, but
if
there was evidence, I'd love to hear it.
There's a novel respiratory coronavirus overtaking Wuhan, China. What do? Oh, you know who we could ask? The Wuhan novel respiratory coronavirus lab. The disease is the same name as the lab. That's just a little too weird, don't you think? And then they ask the scientists, they're like, how did this... So wait a minute, you work at the Wuhan respiratory coronavirus lab. How did this happen? And they're like, a pangolin kissed a turtle. And you're like, no, the name of your lab. If you look at the name, let me see your business card. Show me your business card. Oh, I work at the coronavirus lab in Wuhan. Oh, because there's a coronavirus loose in Wuhan. How did that happen? Maybe a bat flew into the cloaca of a turkey and then it sneezed into my chili and now we all have coronavirus. Like, come on.
Okay. Wait a second.
What about this? Listen to this.
Wait a second.
All right.
John.
Oh my God. there's been an outbreak of chocolatey goodness near Hershey, Pennsylvania. What do you think happened? Like, oh, I don't know. Maybe a steam shovel mated with a cocoa bean. Or it's the chocolate factory. Maybe that's it.
That could be. That could be.
So here's what I want you to consider. I want you to consider that everything related to SARS-CoV-2, Wuhan, Peter Daszak, Dr. Shi, the Bat Lady, everything related to that virus is the red herring. That's Stephen Paddock. Has nothing to do with what Dr. Fauci and the United States intelligence apparatus is trying to cover up.
Got it.
Which is that one of our most strategic tools. Oops. Now, is anybody going to admit that it was intentionally released? No freaking way.
That's what science does. They push things. They do the thing like, okay, listen to this. So a few years back,
You know, we stopped filming a long
I understand
time ago.
that. A couple of years ago, there was the 1918. You remember the last pandemic, right?
Sure, not
so a bunch of
personally, but
scientists.
yes, I've read up.
I was there. Look at my beard. 1918. They had a sample that I guess had been in the whatever permafrost lab in the 1918. So the idea was they were going to reanimate it so that they could study it. The 1918 pandemic flew. They had a little sample of it, and it hadn't been a scourge in the earth for 100 years. And they thought to themselves, what if we just, I don't know, woke it up? And nobody in the room was like, no, let's not do that. But they did that. Here's how I believe the world ends. And I say this to you in sincerity. Okay. It does not end. We are a screwed up world. There's racism, income inequality, fascism, authoritarianism, all these horrible, horrible things, natural resources that run down. That'll all be fine. The world ends, the last words man utters are somewhere in a lab. A guy goes, it worked.
Obviously, it was an accident at Zero in Australia. Zero is
and
there.
we get to squeal. The perk is we also get to squeal about the Chinese.
Mm-hmm. We get to blame the Chinese.
Our geopolitical crap.
And all the xenophobic crap and the China virus,
exactly.
China. And everybody.
You know, when they prosecute a bunch of Wall Street guys during the crisis in 08-09, they went after a couple of Indian hedge fund managers to get the xenophobic fist bump. I know.
Well, I met one of them, Raj Rajanathan. I'll tell you that story another time.
Oh, really? Oh, that's a fascinating story.
Yeah, I'll tell you about that some other time.
This theory has not made it.
Yeah, this is this is pretty well suppressed, and imagine why that might be, right?
Yeah, I can't fathom.
So imagine if that last story we talked about 2 weeks ago, if I'm on some pretty big shit lists there, imagine the shit list I'm on now. With this, I'm a 2-time winner. So as far as
I just don't know if we rise to the level of detection.
Oh yeah, I can show you. I can show you that we do, or at least that the work I've done has.
Okay.
I did an episode with a guy who said he was using a rather sophisticated firewall tool that tracks and logs all the incoming pings on the firewall. And he said that after he did a search for I am John Cullen, he was inundated with pings from MIT and from Halliburton and Xerox. And he was like, what the hell is going on
The
here?
Halliburton, I kind of get. Xerox, I'm unaware of. Oh, Xerox PARC. MIT is an absolute. MIT, Stanford, Harvard are the three
I'll show
big.
you. I'll show it to you. I'll send you a link
Go
to
for
the
it.
video. Yeah. So it's pretty
Let's keep
cool.
going.
right.
Let's keep going on COVID.
So how do you hide a pandemic? How do you hide? So assume, use this as a straw man hypothesis. So the straw man hypothesis is a virus gets out of Walter Reed or one of their partner labs. So for example, we partner with Sero in Australia. That's their BSL-4 laboratory in Australia. So the virus could have escaped or, accidentally, or somebody just got lazy, whatever, from that
Let's
lab.
not forget 46 labs in Ukraine. Let's not forget that.
But the outbreak appears to begin in Australia. So in other words, we see it and it's on the news and they're like, holy mackerel, like everybody's dying here. Like this is crazy. So we see it happen in Australia and it's in the system.
Influenza has the potential to be very dangerous, I think, compared to some issues such as Ebola or a new strain of flu such as swine flu. People have become desensitized because it's there every year. But it is certainly a serious infection.
Notifications for influenza have skyrocketed this year, hitting almost 58,000 cases so far. That dwarfs the number of notifications normally received by this time of year. Already, 139 people have died, including a 3-year-old in Victoria and a 15-year-old girl in Adelaide.
It has been a very bad year, although technically we're still not in the flu season.
It's in this, you'll see it here in this GISRS system from the WHO. So one thing we're going to need is a cover-up virus from Peter Daszak. Okay, he's got one that's got all the bells and whistles. It's got.
How do you get him to track so perfectly? How do you get him to?
I'll show you.
I
Well,
would
that's
expect him to
math.
track differently.
That's so easy. Come on, that's math. You
I don't know.
Come on, you're going to laugh. This
Go
is
for
so
it.
simple.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
So second step in the illusion. How this, and to me, this is the goosebump moment when I realized how they did this. How do you hide a pandemic? So assume it.
Okay.
All right. Do you know that they reconstructed the 1918 Spanish flu? You know that, right? They went to Alaska. They dug up a body. They brought back lung tissue.
Yes,
And
yes. It seemed like a stupid idea, right?
Correct. Ray Kurzweil, Bill Joy,
Right.
they read a piece called Recipe for Destruction in 2005. And they said, not only are you out of your minds doing it, you're going to publish this in the public domain? You're going to put this on GenBank?
Did you read The Great Influenza, by the way? Did you read The Great Influenza? It's fantastic.
No.
It's really a great
is
book.
that David Moore?
John Barry. No, John
Barry's
Barry.
book. Yeah. Well,
I read that back
in
in 2005, and so I was ready. And I was reading about immunology in 19 for some crazy reason. I just finished a book on the Black Death, and for some reason, just by chance, I was ready for COVID. I was primed. My genetics major was 45 years old, so that wasn't going to do me any good.
All right, you're going to love
this.
this.
For some
then.
reason, I'd gone through a binge on immunology and
this is going to give you
pandemics.
goosebumps. Then this is going to give you goosebumps. In 1999, Johan Holton goes to Alaska, digs up an Inuit woman who passed away.
I remember
from
this.
The flu.
I remember this.
Breivik Mission, Alaska, brings the tissue back to Jeffrey Taubenberger and Terrence Tempe at Walter Reed Fort Detrick. They sequence
I didn't know that part.
Okay, they sequence it.
Right.
And then they synthesize it. And they publish the sequence on GenBank or whatever it was called, the equivalent in the day in 2005. Ray Kurzweil, who now is a senior fellow at Google, he's the guy who invented the Braille reading machine. He invented the scanner. Guy's, brilliant futurist and all that. Whether you agree with his observations or whatever is not the point. The point is, brilliant guy, invents the scanner, invents the Braille reading machine, Kurzweil keyboards, synthesizers, all that. He says Fauci and Collins are off the reservation. They're out of their minds. This is the deadliest virus. He says this is the deadliest virus mankind has ever seen. It killed 50 to 100 million people back then, and you're going to resurrect it? They did it anyway. They did it anyway. Now, that was 2005 that they publish it on GenBank. That means Kawaoka has had 15 years to figure out how to take that virus and turn off how it gives you a fever. Now
Yeah,
got,
let me point out something strange. So a lot of people think that the deaths in 18 were bacterial pneumonia deaths and that we could have saved all the people if we simply had antibiotics. If you read Barry's book, one of the things you find out is that this virus ravaged the human body. Correct. This virus, they do autopsies, unlike lately where they refuse to do autopsies for reasons we surely know.
This is why.
They do autopsies and they'd have brain hemorrhages, and they said that, I can't remember what the gas was, but your flesh would develop pockets of gas, and when they roll the people, they sounded like Rice Krispies with milk being poured on them. And there's people said, I can't listen to a bowl of Rice Krispies get milk poured on it because it creeps me out. The people who were there, it was a horrifying flu. It was a real killer, not just bacterial. I just read this morning someone said it was bacterial deaths. No, it was not.
This virus back in 1918 turned the lungs into like a mush. Yeah, like a jelly. Yes. Like they couldn't understand what the hell is going on here, but it was post-mortem. It was post-mortem. The way they described the disease in 1918, obviously they didn't call it the Spanish flu. The reason I got that name is because Spain wasn't involved in the war, and so they reported on it because all the other countries didn't want anybody to know people were sick. Spain wasn't involved in the war.
Came from Kansas, right?
Yeah, Kansas, yeah. So Spain reports on it. So everybody thought it was the Spanish flu. So that's how it gets that name. But back in the day, they called it the Blue Death because people's lips were turning blue from hypoxia, cyanosis. Right. That's okay. So now we heard those symptoms early on from doctors like Dr. Cameron Kyle Seidel, Dr. Zach Bush, and they start describing people who are hypoxic with blue lips. They said it's not that they can't breathe. They don't have ARDS. It's not their diaphragm. They're not processing the oxygen. It's like they're up at 20,000 feet and they're breathing and breathing. Nothing's happening. They're not processing the O2.
It literally says the patients turn blue and then have to wait until their lungs eventually fill with fluid and then they die. The course of events there is very important. They first turn blue before their lungs have fluid in them. And so there's not a respiratory failure that leads this thing. And then eventually with fluid in their lungs, they develop pneumonia and die. This is exactly what's happening. They're presenting with hypoxia, which is a loss of oxygen in tissue. So the patients are presenting blue and with these remarkably low numbers of oxygen in the bloodstream. And yet a lot of them look pretty comfortable. They're not breathing fast. They're not in any distress. And so the doctors are freaking out, trying to figure out, why is this patient sitting here talking to me with an oxygen level this low, blue in the face, and going into multi-organ failure? Liver is the number one thing when they screened. There was a nice article that showed what is the initial laboratories of 5,000 patients presenting with COVID like symptoms in New York. Of those 5,000 patients, the vast majority didn't even have fever. The average temperature was 37 degrees Celsius, which is a normal body temperature. And so they don't have fever, they don't have any signs of respiratory distress, and yet they have bump in liver enzymes. That's the only laboratory finding that seems to be consistent. Their white blood cells aren't elevated as if they have a virus. They don't have shift in triglycerides, suggesting some inflammatory event. And so there's nothing in that article I'm pouring through and show me the evidence that this person is having a viral infection. Show me the evidence that there's some signs in the immune system or otherwise that there's a virus at foot. Instead, they're dying of hypoxia. They have loss of oxygen at the tissue level, and their tissue is being starved of oxygen. And it turns out when you have a hypoxic injury, loss of oxygen in the lung, you get something called ground glass.
And they're
which was the same problem that COVID had.
Well, that's the same problem as the 1918 flu. In other words, what these doctors were describing when they thought they were seeing these early COVID cases were the symptoms that we know were the Blue Death. So when I listen to Cameron Kyle Seidel,
that's why they intubated the shit out of people. They would just jam that thing down their throat.
I if people start dying, then it serves everybody's scared. So let's talk about how to hide a pandemic. First thing we need to set is a scapegoat virus. We got that. Peter Daszak's got a whole book of them, right? And we get one from China, so we can blame China. And we got the Wuhan game, so that's kind of easy peasy. All right, now, how do we fool every physician on earth? That's going to be a little tougher. How do we fool?
I don't know. That sounds easy to me.
So how do we fool? It is. It turns out it's remarkably easy. And sort of the irony here is none of them want to admit it, because nobody wants to admit that they got fooled, because they think it makes them look stupid. And it doesn't make you look stupid.
And they'll get fired.
Well, they can't fire everybody. Everybody got fooled. So what happened? Right. How do you hide a pandemic? All right. So let's say you and I are part of the counterintelligence team now. And they said, listen, we got this mishap. One of Fauci and Taubenberger's strains, Kawaoka monkeyed with it, and it got out. Okay, assume the best. Assume it was an accident. Okay, but we still have to cover it up, because if anybody looks at it, they're going to go, "Oh wait, that's Taubenberger's with a Kawaoka hook." Wait, what are you guys talking about? So we have to cover it up. So how do we do it? How do we fool every physician on earth? Well, let's ask Christian Drosten. What does Christian Drosten say? Christian Drosten says, oh, that's easy peasy. We need a PCR test. Give me a PCR test, and I'll make it find whatever you want me to find. And I'll give you whatever percentage of the population positive you want. What do you want? 86%, 81%, 79%? What percent do you need positive? Now, the bigger question is, if you look at the slide that's blue, there's a slide in the deck. I think it's slide number 47.
Oh, yeah. Okay, I got it.
This is the PCR. This is the BioFire PCR test. How many strains of influenza does it test for? 5.
What slide am I looking at here? Hold on.
It's slide number 47. It says BioFire, the BioFire respiratory panel, and it's teal colored. You can't miss it. It's a big teal colored slide.
Got it.
Okay. So this is one of the most common PCR tests is BioFire. Another brand is ePlex. Another one I think is Panther. And each one of them has what they call a respiratory panel, and it tests for a certain number of things. Well, before Kerry Mullis died, he said, you really shouldn't use this for diagnostic purposes. Now, why would that? Okay.
Emphatically.
Right. So now, but we need to apply that to the real world. It's like, because he died.
By the way, Kerry Mullis dying in 2019 is a little on the suspicious side. If you really want to know.
We all agree.
Okay.
Same with Timothy Cunningham. So the issue here is this is such genius. This is such evil genius. It's spooky. How do we hide it? Let's assume Taubenberger's strain, the 1918 reconstructed pandemic influenza, this deadly virus that turns lungs to mush, it's out, and it's killing people in Australia. We know it's going to Wuhan, which means it's going around the world. How do we hide it?
You look for the common overlap of the sequence.
You don't put the strain in the PCR test.
Oh, well, that.
How easy is that?
Works.
How easy is that? Let's test for all the innocuous strains of influenza, PDM09 and H3N2, and we're going to test.
But wait a minute.
For
but
the
how
most
does the
common
flu
things? This is
but how
absurd.
does the flu show? How does the flu show all those flu cases then?
Because FluView, the data is coming from coroners and medical examiners.
Okay, so they're not using the same protocol.
And it's postmortem, right? And so whether they're doing the culture, now the other thing that's fascinating here is you wonder, well, why haven't we heard from coroners? Why haven't the coroners come forward and say, what the hell's with all the flu deaths? There's over 200,000 coroners in America. It's like 230,000 coroners. What that means is the number of deaths, we have 1.2 million deaths in 3 years. Divided by 200-something thousand coroners, it's only 2 or 3 extra deaths per coroner. Yeah. They're not going to notice. It's like the law of large numbers. when I take
Right.
it all the way down to the individual coroner, it's 2 or 3 extra influenza deaths in the last 3 years. But multiply that out over 3 years and 240,000 coroners, 1.2 million P&I deaths. So how do you hide a pandemic? Well, step number 2, don't put the strain in the biofire test. Now, that's real easy considering the strain I'm talking about is a BSL-4 strain. It is the only BSL-4 influenza strain on Earth. BSL-4 is Ebola, Marburg, Lassa virus, and reconstructed 1918 pandemic influenza is BSL-4. Right. It is the only BSL-4 influenza. If
so you have a monopoly. You have a monopoly on the test.
Nobody has the strain in any PCR test. What the hell? How many PCR tests are testing you for Ebola? If you go get tested and you have Ebola, does it come back and say, "Oh, by the way, Dave, you also have Ebola"? No, it's not in the test. That
explains why I feel like shit.
It's not in the test. So let's take this a little further. What if you had H7N9? H7N9 was a devastating strain of influenza that tore through Asia in 2016, 2017. Right. I think I came down with it. I came down with a version of influenza. I thought I was going to die. It felt like my respiratory tract was filled with shards of glass. I had a fever for 10 days. It was as bad as anything I've ever had. 2016, 2017. That's not in the test. That's not in the PCR test. What about H5N1? Is that in the PCR test? No, that's not in the test. So wait a second. You're telling me you just tested 30 million, 40 million people that could have this virus and nobody can tell? That's what I call evil genius, and I got to tip my hat to Kristen Drosten.
So you rig the PCR test to not see the flu.
You don't even have to rig it. You just don't put it in there.
Just not use it.
You just don't put it in there. It's only going to find the exact strains you put in that assay. It's got a whole bunch of little wells in it. You know what it looks like, right? It looks like a.
So how many different PCR tests does BioFire oversee?
Talking a mad game. Wish I was sipping on what you were having. You play it up, it's a method, a habit. I hear it all the time, but nothing that you're doing can back it. Here we go again. They wish they had me and they bitter. They be bitter. It's noise. The only thing I call a thriller is the silver. I'm only ever gonna be on top. I make the money and I can't stop. I make the money and I can't stop. Oh, I can't stop. Oh, no. You think about me? No. I know you think about me. it.